Right, let's talk all things Spurs now. I'm delighted to say that we're joined by Chris Cowlin from the Spurs Chat podcast. Chris, I believe you're out in Hong Kong following their pre-season as well.
Yes, it's been a very tiring trip to Hong Kong, but absolutely delighted to be here. Just been down to Victoria Harbour to see a wonderful light show, and what a wonderful place it is here.
Ah, brilliant stuff. In terms of the football, what have you found of Thomas Frank's first few games, the tactical setup? Are you expecting to see a very different Spurs this season?
Yeah, I think that's very fair to say. We're going to see a very different Spurs. We're going to see a Tottenham that is going to be very, very difficult to beat this season. Of course, we did have 22 league defeats last year, but of course, we did win the Europa League, so it ended well last season under Ange Postecoglou. But we've played 3 pre-season friendlies so far. Reading 2-0 win away. We found it hard to break them down in the first half. Thomas Frank changed a number of things at half time. He changed the starting 11, the entire 11, I might add. And then on Saturday, we played 2 pre-season friendlies. One was at Hotspur away, one was away at Luton. They ended in 2 draws, 2-2 against Wickham, 0-0 against Luton. So we've had 3 draws so far against 3 League One sides. I know there has been a lot of negativity online from a number of Spurs fans because, we're at this stage again where we all want to get behind the team. We all want to get behind yet another new manager, and there's been a lot of them in recent years. But we're back to this stage again where we want to see, real quality signings through the door. We've gone through mixed emotions in this last 12 months. Of course, as I mentioned, all those league defeats. We won the Europa League, lifting the trophy after such a drought at Tottenham with trophies. Wonderful to see. The trophy parade was absolutely sensational. And then, of course, we changed the manager. Thomas Frank's come in. And then we saw, Spurs showing real ambition in wanting to spend £120 million in a week in Coach Dekai, Mohamed Kudus, and then Morgan Gibbs-White. And then, of course, the Morgan Gibbs-White deal has not got over the line, and it's fallen through. So what next for Tottenham? My concern, and I feel like a lot of Spurs fans feel exactly the same, is that we had a lot to do at the start of this transfer window, and we've signed one first-team player who can walk straight into this starting 11 in Mohamed Kudus, with respect. And, we had a lot of work to do at the start of the window. Teams around us, all of our biggest rivals, Liverpool, for example, they were miles ahead of Spurs in the Premier League last season, and they've shown real intent, and they've gone out and spent a lot of money on a lot of quality players. So every team around us in the Premier League has spent money, shown real intent, and it's getting harder and harder, and Spurs need to keep up.
You mentioned Thomas Frank and the impact that he's tried to have since coming through the door at Spurs. You've seen the team up close and personal. Have you noticed anything tactically that has been different to what Ange brought to Spurs, and you think it would be able to implement his philosophy in terms of to the squad going forward in the next season?
Yeah, it's funny, in that Reading game we saw a number of different formations, and what I really liked at half time is he saw that it didn't work in the first half. It was 0-0 at half time, and then he changed a number of things. And
you can't be used to that, Chris.
No, we basically played 3-4 formations throughout the game. We were changing formation as we were moving up the pitch, and then changing formation as we were moving back down the pitch. I do feel like we're going to see a more defensive Spurs. A lot of Tottenham fans want to see open attacking football. I hope that we do see that, but of course we do need the players. We need the right personnel in able to, for him to do the job that he wants to do. But he's going to be more pragmatic. We're going to be a lot more difficult to beat this season. And when you're more difficult to beat, you are having to be more defensive. And that's exactly what we are going to see under Thomas Frank. It's not going to be, like it was under Ange Postecoglou, where it was exciting. Some people thought it was kamikaze at times, our defending, but it was exciting a lot of the time under Ange, and ultimately it did, end in a trophy. He sacrificed his own job to win us a trophy in the Europa League, but it's going to be very, very interesting under Thomas Frank, because Thomas Frank himself, as well as Vinay Venkatesham, the new CEO at the club, and Chairman Daniel Levy, they've all been aligned, and they have all said exactly the same thing. We all want to be fighting on all 4 fronts, on every single competition. Now, we know last season we didn't have a strong squad and able to do that because we had all of the injuries as well. So, there is a lot of work to do. I cannot stress that enough, how much work there is to do in this transfer window. We have been crying out for a number 6 in the last couple of seasons. We need a cover for Destiny Udogie, and I might add that he's not travelled out to Hong Kong because of an injury, so we need a backup for him, or someone who's going to really rival him in that position. We need a creative player in number 10. It's a big shame that the Morgan Gibbs-White deal didn't get done and over the line. And I believe that we still need a game changer, and we need another striker, in my opinion. And also work to do in getting some of the players out the door who do need replacing and upgrading with respect. And I'd say that in players like Richarlison and Yves Bissouma, and it looks highly likely that HeungMin Son will go out the door as well after the Asia tour.
I mean, with the Gibbs-White situation, you must be sitting there, Chris, and thinking, how on earth has Marinakis pulled this one off? Because even when those initial reports came out and he was angry with absolutely everyone, threw his toys out the pram and said he was going to bring about legal action, you still felt like Gibbs-White would eventually end up at Spurs. It must have been a bit gut-wrenching to then read the news that he'd signed the new deal.
Yeah, and also on the YouTube channel and the podcast that we do, we speak to a lot of journalists, and every single journalist, reliable journalist I might add, that we spoke to, they all seem to think that this deal would get done and over the line. It was just a matter of time. But now we're hearing reports that the club didn't meet the conditions, or the full conditions, of the release clause. Only the agent, the player, and the club will know that those conditions of that release clause. But I think there's been 2 winners here. I think it's Nottingham Forest, and I feel like it's the player and the agent. Of course, the agent and the player have probably made a lot more money. And I don't agree with his decision. I think he'd be more successful at Tottenham than Nottingham Forest, and I hate to see players making decisions where instead of playing Champions League football, they're after more money in the bank. I think that's a shame to see. But it's about Tottenham moving on now from this decision that Morgan Gibbs-White has made. If he really wanted to join Tottenham, he could have come out and said to Marinakis, look, I want to leave, I want to sign for a bigger club. But that wasn't to be. He's chosen to stay there. But it's about, moving on now and trying to identify those right players. Ange Postecoglou in his last couple of press conferences alluded to the fact that Spurs were going to go after experienced players in this transfer window. And when you look at all the players that Spurs have been linked with so far in this window, most of them have Premier League experience, and I love the fact that we're targeting those types of players. But a number of fans are getting really frustrated the fact that we are interested in so many players and we're not getting the deals over the line. And when you see, and like I said earlier, all the teams around us, the Premier League, there's no easy game in the Premier League, and these Premier League games are going to get harder and harder because all of these teams are strengthening. And we've only signed one player to walk into our starting 11. So I can't stress it enough. There's so much to do.
You mentioned about the possibility of income and experience in the Spurs team. Ben Jacobs, obviously talkSPORT reports, has exclusively released just this minute that LAFC advancing to sign Spurs captain Son Heung-Min. Obviously, he's one of your most experienced players, if not your most experienced player. Scored so many goals for Spurs in the Premier League, but we saw last season that he's clearly not his former self. What's your thoughts and reaction to the news that Spurs are possibly selling their captain, HeungMin Son, this summer to LAFC?
Yeah, of course. We know that Sonny has always got a smile on his face. That's what he's known for. The last 10 years at Spurs have been incredible, and last season wasn't a great season for him personally. I love the fact that he lifted that trophy for Tottenham. That's all I've ever wanted to see. Someone like Sonny, parading that trophy down the high road at Tottenham. But like you mentioned there, he wasn't the player that he has been in the previous 9 years. There has been a decline. And what was a big shame last week away at Reading is before the game, during the game and after the game, he just looked so down and he just looked so miserable and upset with something. Whether that's Thomas Franks told him that the captaincy has now been given to Christian Romero, and perhaps they've had the talks that he is going to leave after the Asia tour, after the game in South Korea against Newcastle. Whether Son will actually remain at Spurs for the Bayern Munich away game, the friendly, and the PSG Super Cup final, let's wait and see. But I wish Sonny all of the very best, and he deserves the very best because he's been a great player for Tottenham over the years. And like I said, it's just great to see him lift that trophy at the club. And if he does go, I'm so glad that he has gone with our last memories of him lifting that trophy.
Yeah, well said there, Chris. Enjoy the rest of your time in Hong Kong.
Thank you so much.
There we go, Chris Cowlin from the Spurs Chat podcast, desperate for some new bodies through the door ahead of the season for Spurs. This is the talkSPORT2 Social, brought to you by Final One Standing, new from William Hill. Terms and conditions apply. 18+, gambleaware.org. Next up, it's Twitter Corner. We're going to get stuck into Manchester United.